Hey y'all, this week we're starting Season 3 of The Andy Griffith Show. Episode 1 is titled Mr. McBeevee. Barney, what's up this week?
I'm having breakfast with Andy, Ultie, and Aunt Dee. And Ultie says he's got a horse named Blackie. And I say, are you kidding me? Ain't that something? Andy, you never said anything. You got to doy a horse. Well, let's go outside and have a look. And then outside there is no horse. And Andy tells me Ultie was just kidding. And I say, I can take a joke just as good as the next fella. I just don't think you should let the doy get started in that direction, that's all. And then later in the courthouse, Ultie talks about his friend, Mr. McBeevee, who walks around in the treetops, and he jingles on his belt, and he wears a big shiny silver hat.
And then later he shows you a hatchet he says he got from this guy, Mr. McBeevee.
And then he says, Ultie, are you sure that's where it came from? Why don't you go put it back where you found it? And after Ultie leaves, I say, it's a good idea you stopped him, Andy. Sooner or later, he's going to have to find out he's living in a real world where there just ain't any Mr. McBeevees.
And then the audience sees that there actually is a Mr. McBeevee. Opie goes out and talks to him. He's a telephone line man, which is why he walks around in the treetops and he jingles his tools on his belt and he's wearing a big shiny silver hat. And Opie gives him back the hatchet and the man gives him a quarter.
Meanwhile, I'm reconsidering, and I'm thinking that this guy might actually exist. So the next time I see Ultie, I say, how about giving me a description of this Mr. McBeevee? And he says some things that just aren't believable. But then he shows us the quarter. So Andy says he wants to see this man. So Ultie takes him there.
But while they're driving out, Mr. McBeevee gets a call from his home office and has to go somewhere, so he drives away in his truck.
So they can't find him. And Andy takes Ultie home and sends him to his room. And he tells Aunt Dee that the boy has been lying and he needs a whipping. Then he goes to Ultie's room and he tells Ultie he can avoid a whipping if he admits that Mr. McBeevee doesn't exist. And Ultie says he can't say that. Mr. McBeevee does exist. And he says, don't you believe me, Pa? And then he thinks it over and he says, I believe you. And he leaves the room. And then when I hear that, I say, but Andy, what he told you is impossible. How can you explain it all? You mean you do believe in Mr. McBeevee? And Andy says, no, but I do believe in Ultie.
So Andy goes to the woods where Opie said he saw this guy to look for himself, and he sees the guy, sees Mr. McBeevee, and he goes up and shakes his hand and says, you can't believe how happy I am to meet you.
And then Andy comes and tells me that he just met Mr. McBeevee. Then I tell Andy to sit down. He's been working too hard. And I make a phone call to the doctor. And I say it's an emergency. And Andy says Mr. McBeevee's maybe coming over to supper tonight. And that I should come too. And I say, oh yeah, I'll do that, Andy. And I'll even wear my shiny silver hat.
And then Mr. McBeevee calls on the phone and says he will come for supper. And that confuses you even more. We'll see you next week for episode 2 of Season 3.